Welcome to the New Books Network.
Hi everyone, I'm Yash, your host for the New Books Network. Today we will talk to Dr. Yamini Narayanan about a new book, Mother Cow, Mother India, a multi-species politics of dairy in India, which was published by Stanford University Press in 2023. Thank you so much, Yamini, for joining me today for this conversation.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Yash.
Starting with the first question, you mentioned this as an anecdote in the introduction to the book, but for the audience, could you share the intellectual journey that led you to become interested in the study of dairy politics in India?
Thank you so much for this question. I actually really appreciate the opportunity to reflect on my arrival, as it were, to critical animal studies, but more specifically to writing a book on cow protection politics as a Brahmin woman. So because it automatically raises so many questions about what my motivations are in coming to this space. So I really appreciate this question. I do reflect on a lot of moments of arrival, as it were. There is a lot of moments of arrival when we um, enter into any space which is fraught with identity politics, advocacy, resistance, etc., vulnerability. So there's many, many moments of arrival, and I do discuss a few of them in my book. But what I want to focus on today is one that I didn't really discuss in my book, but nonetheless made a really profound impact on me, right? And this was about 10 years ago, and a friend posted on Facebook or something about tortured bunnies and cosmetic testing. And it appeared on my Facebook feed. This was not the first time that she had posted on animal cruelty. She was, at that time, the only person in the collective that was posting on animal cruelty at all, but it was the first time that I really froze in shock, right? So the video showed a rabbit with a large patch of her fur scrapped raw, burnt, huddled in a shoebox of a wire cage. The terror in the rabbit's eyes, wide eyes, and an attempt to um, try and avoid the camera's gaze was unmistakable. She had nothing in that stark cage. There was not even a watering bowl behind which she could cower, and that complete exposure to the risk of even being seen, leave alone everything else that she had endured, was really visceral. And shortly after that, I actually witnessed one of PETA's agonizing exposés. I mean, PETA is very problematic in the animal advocacy space because a lot of their approaches to advocacy are quite controversial, but they also generate some really visceral content of normalized violence, violence against animals, which is extremely normalized in production spaces, right? And in this case, it was again a rabbit video. It was focused on the ripping of rabbit fur from screaming live rabbits in a Chinese Angora farm. And it came up, and I wept openly in this, busy central Melbourne cafe where I was sitting and writing at that time. And growing up, I had lived with 13 rabbits as a child. I knew them to be cheeky personalities, but I had not known, my family did not know, and we had lived with rabbits for years. We did not know that rabbits were capable of producing that kind of scream. We had never heard that. After, more than a decade of living with rabbits, we had never heard that kind of scream. We also never know of a side of human terror and vulnerability either. We also don't know the many ways in which humans can scream, for example, and we shouldn't know, because no living being should be put through these things. But that was a really visceral moment. And that, in many ways, was also a beginning of a very conscious exploration into seeking out the realities of animals in production spaces specifically. Right? Because as a vegetarian at that time, born and raised, I had not even remotely considered that any product that I consume derived from animal products, whether it was, ghee or butter or milk or leather or fur, any of these things could be in any way entangled with violence, because, you just assume um, because we have these frames of thinking about what vegetarianism means, what non-vegetarianism means, with reference to, specifically with reference to violence against animals. And because the animals are not immediately or viscerally or visibly slaughtered, we necessarily don't connect these two things. And I hadn't, right? So this was a very conscious exploration, and I pretty much turned my back on my previous research overnight. So previously, I used to work on feminist urban planning and gender sensitive urban planning in Indian cities. Really important topic. But when I was confronted so viscerally and so unexpectedly with issues of animal violence, I found it difficult to focus anymore on anything other than the animal world. And I actually walked away from this research overnight. I didn't have an animal bibliography. I didn't know who the big names in animal studies were. I didn't even know there was an animal studies. I didn't know who else studied animals. I had no idea. All I knew that was that I had to sort of go in there. So I think I would, as a side note, I would always encourage researchers to truly follow what their intuition and gut tells them, because it could possibly lead to somewhere where they really need to go. But my foray into cow protection politics and studying the politics of the cows and national identities in India, that was actually much more of a mundane decision. So I started to make contact with a lot of animal groups, like animal rescue groups in India. And one of them was the Vishaka Society for the Protection and Care of Animals based in Vishakhapatnam. And Pradeep Kumar Nath founded this organization. He's now a really dear friend. But at that time, he was one of those people that answered my questions most patiently, really ignorant, basic questions. Because while we live in such vivid multi-species environments in India, and while we are constantly located against very multi-species landscapes, they are so ubiquitous that they're almost unseen, right? And it's also our anthropocentrism, which is not necessarily always a bad thing, but it does kind of politically, in many ways, not make animal lives and animal bodies visible, like other than human animal bodies and animal lives visible. So my level of ignorance was quite something, and he was very patient in answering these questions. I went and visited him in Vishakhapatnam, and I talk about this at length in my book because we spoke for hours. And he told me about this huge landscape of animals that he had worked with in the 30, 40 years that he had been in the field, and his heartbreak and his traumas and his reliving. The aftershocks of animal activism is something that a lot of people have. I think Naisar Gidave has done some fantastic work on it. In the US, Patrice Jones actually has a book called Aftershock, about the specific sort of traumas that come from witnessing animal realities. And he was talking at length about, you know, cobras that he had rescued. He had talked about emus that he had rescued. He had talked about a whole spectrum of species. And I was absolutely confused about where do I go? Because every story he told me was just profoundly difficult to even hear. Right. I mean, I wasn't the one who had lived any of these things, but it was really difficult to even hear what he was telling me. And I spent a lot of time with him. And in the end, I said, I don't know what to do. You tell me what to do. I said, from an animal, you're an activist in the field. Um, what would you have me do? What would you think? And he actually said, focus on the cows, because on the one hand, this was 2014. The Modi government had just come to power. There was a rise in cow vigilantism. He said, suddenly these people are doing something that we have always been doing. We were not unaware of the way that animals were jammed into trucks and sent to slaughterhouses. We weren't unaware of any of these things. We have been trying to call attention from a very specific animal rights perspective, right, which has got nothing to do with the Hindu right. So we have been trying to call attention for a number of animals for years, and we know about so many things that are happening undercover, illegally, but also profound acts of violence, which I think would really shake up the public if we knew, because I think a lot of the times we just don't know. So, but he said, suddenly this is in the public space. They are adopting some of our techniques, because animal rights activists have been trying to halt trucks for a while as well, because the cows are the one animal for whom it is possible actually to legislatively seek some type of protection. They're not unaware of how problematic it is, but animal activists always say we have such small wins for the animals, so why can't we take what's available? So they've been deploying these tactics for a while, of course on a much smaller scale, but they're like, suddenly the Hindu right is doing it, and suddenly we are becoming identified with the Hindu right. Like, so they had nothing to do with Hindu authoritarian politics. They had nothing to do with any type of nation making. They had nothing to do with any type of exclusionary politics per se. But suddenly there was this collapse of animal activists and workers of the Hindu right, right? Which is actually quite a confronting place to be in if you think about it, because we wouldn't just so easily collapse human rights activist per se with an authoritarian state. So and this was always a difficult ground for me to tread as well, like, trying to parse out their motivations and trying to see where these sorts of tensions collapsed and where they did diverge. So he said, I don't know what to make of what's going on. None of us know what to make of what's going on. And Naisagi Dave talks about this in her work as well, about, how activists in general, but animal activists in particular, are responding and working in a state of emergency all the time. And, they don't necessarily have the kind of luxury of time, of research, of reflection that we academics do. And when he said, I don't know what to make of this, he was actually being real and being honest. He said, I don't know what to make of this. Is this his core concern was, is this good for the animals? Like the way that, political life has taken over this debate, is there anything in this for the animals? So he said, focus on the animals. So, and when I said, fine, great, I'll do it, right? That's what I'll do. And he was fantastic in offering me support. And then, of course, connected me with animal groups across India. So it really became a pan-Indian exploration. And that, I think, was also something that became distinctive about my research, because it wasn't just, there was no way of racializing a pan-Indian study. If I had just focused on one state, it was so easy to racialize what was going on and, say that, oh, people of this state or this religion or this culture are particularly responsible or specifically responsible for the way cows are treated, but everyone else is, free of blame or responsibility. Whereas a pan-Indian study makes it impossible to racialize the politics of dairy production, the politics of cow slaughter, and it also makes it impossible to racialize inhumane or humane treatment to animals, because animals have to be treated a particular way once they are in production, in any type of production space, right? It's just the cold economic realities of animal production. So it was a very mundane decision, specifically to focus on cows. So I think my approach has always been, either I'm guided intuitively by animals or I'm guided by animal activists, the ones that genuinely, in my view, work with grace and honesty and integrity for, animal liberation of some type. So that was my foray into looking into animals specifically. And then eventually, as I started to get deeper and deeper into it, it of course became very important to explain my own motivations in working on animals, because they're like, oh, well, as a Brahmin woman, you are clearly having a particular agenda here. And that was never the case, because as a Brahmin woman, as a Brahmin growing up in India, we had never once been told to be, show any kind of responsibility or care for any type of animal, whether it was cows or any other, because I think more generally in human society, animals remain unseen. So this was my foray into the space.
Thank you for that response. And that's such a fascinating overview of a lot of themes we're going to go into in a little more detail after this. But I think that gives us a good segue into the next question. So in your introduction, there's this striking passage where you write, and I quote, "It may seem grossly incongruous, even offensive, to focus on cows and buffaloes when horrific violence against racialized and casteized humans is being perpetrated in the name of protecting cows," unquote. In such a context, what do you think we can learn from your book in specific, as well as the broader tradition of multi-species politics?
This is an excellent question, because it has gone right into the heart of the core issue in identity politics, right? But also more broadly and pervasively. We are getting right to the heart of what we don't sort of engage in identity politics, which is anthropocentrism. We closely engage racism, we closely engage sexism, we closely engage ableism, we closely engage a whole spectrum of very critical identities as we see relevant in the humanist realm. But one thing that we negate almost completely is anthropocentrism, right? It's an ideology. It's not a fact. It's an ideology that fundamentally defines virtually every type and scale of human institutions, whether it is cultural, political, social. It is guided by the anthropocentric ideology, the belief around human exceptionalism and human supremacy, that considers not only humans to be exceptional or different to animals, but it generally disregards the idea or even denies the idea that humans are animals at all, right? Out of all the complex identity categories that we engage with, as I said, race, caste, gender, ability, our animality is one that we deny, one that we blur, or one that we actively distance ourselves from. And in denying our animality, it actually becomes possible to wield animals' animality against them, right? Because animals are animals have a particular type of animality. We deny our own animality, but it's also not that straightforward because, as we know, dehumanization or making an animal making a human subhuman is a core part of othering, of exclusions, and of creating binaries and hierarchies in general, right? But as I discuss in Mother Cow, Mother India, but also in some of the work that I've done with Kritika Srinivasan, for example, we talk about how species, and I'm quoting here, as an axis of social difference. Because species is also not just a biological category. It's not a category of just zoology per se. It is actually a political category. It's a category of social difference. When it is a category of social difference, it's also a category of identity. But this has virtually never been regarded as a core part of identity politics, whether it is in India or elsewhere. The irony is species actually has a central role in shaping the exclusions and inclusions that characterize human society, right? So in purposefully seeing animals as so vastly different from us human animals, it actually becomes possible for us, there's stakes in it for us, right? In not seeing us in a particular way, there's stakes in it. It is possible to normatively inflict violence on animals, especially those that are used in farming, right? The type and the scale of violence, which often defies belief. And when this kind of violence is normalized or obscured, we are spared from having to know about it. We are spared from having to recognize it. We are spared from having to respond to violence. Normally, when violence against humans in any shape or form or category is raised and politicized and named as such, we have an obligation to respond, right? But when we are spared from knowing, when we are spared from recognizing, or when violence is normalized as almost not violence, we are also spared from having to respond. And there's a tremendous payoff in this kind of doublethink and in erasing the fact that we are animals, right? And the doublethink of erasing our own innermost knowing. I think we all know in some way, if we allowed ourselves to think about it, that animals used for any type of production, dairying in this case, suffer the kind of almost eviscerating heartbreak, grief, terror, trauma that we'd consider, recognize, and know to be almost unendurable, and in no way legitimizable when members of our own species experience it, right? But anthropocentrism stratifies not only between humans and animals, it also stratifies between humans. It is actually one of the most insidious forms of social oppression, but it's not recognized as such. So anthropocentrism stratifies between particular classifications of humans. For example, to say Brahmin, white, male, they are the preeminent humans, the humans par excellence, right? And everyone else is sort of less than human or different gradations of being human. So the human is not a straightforward category whatsoever. Sylvia Winter has done some fantastic work, Zakia Imam Jackson, based in the US, about Claire Kim. It's not a straightforward category, and which is exactly why we have such breathtaking unevenness and inequality between humans. And what we need to consider is that animals are actually used as a core way of mobilizing these stratifications between animals, when it comes to disabilities, humans being compared to animals. And in the specific context of my own book, what I have tried to unveil in Mother Cow, Mother India is how it's not just racism, communalism, casteism that shapes cow politics. Anthropocentrism shapes cow politics as it plays out in India, right? In instrumentalizing the cow, that is specifically the lactating cow, as a Hindu body, as Hindu mothering bodies, actually, to purvey the imaginary of the Hindu mother nation, cows are weaponized, and of course they care, their profound connection with their own infants is disrupted. And this is not just to fetishize cows. This is true across dairying. Buffaloes, cows, sheep, camel. I've worked on camels. I've written about camels. I've written about buffaloes. And I've seen goats and sheep absolutely freak out when, their kids are separated. So all of these animals, mammals, are generally extraordinarily fierce and protective mothers. Right? So there is the anthropocentrism in disregarding the animal body per se, but additionally, in a country that purports to be, in effect, a non-slaughtering dairy nation, there are highly vulnerable human workers, some of them from the poorest of Dalit and Muslim communities, who are placed in the situation of performing the incredibly risky labor of transporting cows to slaughter or performing slaughter in no less than an authoritarian, far-right, aspirational Hindu state. Okay, so what happens in any type in dairy farming is, and we can talk about this further, that slaughter is part of of the dairy production continuum. In India, this is denied. In India, this goes underground, and so we have vulnerable Muslim and Dalit workers. It is very convenient that they are Muslims and Dalits. This is not unique of India per se. If Tim Pachuratz talks about in his book Every 12 Seconds, those who work in slaughtering are generally amongst the most vulnerable of that society. So in the United States, for example, they're often undocumented migrant workers, so-called illegal migrant workers who can't get employment elsewhere. And so you generally have very vulnerable human groups that are working in slaughterhouses. Nobody wants to go and work in a slaughterhouse, right? So you have there's vulnerability in performing particular types of labor. This is one such labor. In India, it is not just slaughtering. In India, in most states, it's also criminal labor, right? So there are vulnerable bodies that are being used to perform risky, vulnerable criminal labor that often costs them their lives, right? Because the rule of law gets taken up by vigilante groups. So anthropocentrism operates really well in negating the animal body. It also operates really well in manipulating and exploiting a whole stratified range of human bodies. And it also doesn't work just in exploitation. It also works in elevating, because anthropocentrism works both in elevating as well as in demoralizing, so to speak, right? So you have the upper caste Hindu groups that are associated with cow protection, and the lower caste, so-called lower castes, and the Muslims who are implicitly the other. So we know from the way that women's bodies are used to other Muslims, for example, the Muslim body as the rapist, and now the Muslim body as a cow slaughterer, right? Anthropocentrism operates very, very strongly in shaping our identity politics, and I think we need to pay more attention to it. So this is what I've tried to do in trying to bring the animal body into focus. The interesting thing here is that it overturns the debate. Okay, we can't actually it actually blows apart the racialization of Muslims as a cow slaughterer, because it forces us to confront our sort of shared human complicity in examining not just, there's been the sustained focus, strategic focus on beef and Muslims. That's the keywords. Now we are forced to look, if you're going to actually look at what cow protection means from an animal activist point of view, from an animal rights point of view, we have to start paying attention to milk. We have to start paying attention to Hindus as well, right? Because cows in India are bred for milk, not beef. Milk is a sacred commodity for Hindus. So, but when we disrupt this narration of, when we gaslight basically the narrative into implicating beef and Muslims, but not dairy and Hindus, it forces us actually to consider how dairy is intimately interconnected with slaughter. India, as the largest dairy producing country, is the third largest bovine slaughtering country as well. So I think anthropocentrism forces us to overturn these debates. That's the risk, though. It's also a risk because it overturns the debates that have sustained our ideas of solidarity, our ideas of resistance, our ideas of vulnerabilities, human vulnerabilities, all in the human realm. So there's a risk in actually bringing anthropocentrism into focus. It's not that I was not conflicted myself. I talk about this in my book. I ask these questions, right? Like, for example, I ask, does animal liberation inevitably clash with Dalit liberation? What does animal liberation mean for cows, mean for upper caste politics and culture? Because I was really concerned. Does it actually strengthen Brahmanism? Does animal liberation automatically mean strengthening Brahmanism? Or could it actually bring unchallenged Brahminical practices around animal exploitation into questions? Can we offer something meaningful here to Dalit politics, to animal politics? And I think my answer is a very definitive yes. And this is something that anthropocentrism can, critically examining anthropocentrism and identity politics can actually overturn and expose a lot of human hypocrisies and actually make it, a lot of empowered, so to speak, dominant human hypocrisies that operate to marginalize vulnerable humans further. So I think it's an important critique to bring into focus more and more strongly.
Thank you. That's a that's a really thought-provoking response. And like, especially as someone who's coming in from political science, where this focus is like with its own focus on like elite behaviors and power politics, this isn't something that is particularly thought about and written about. So I think your insights are particularly relevant, especially even for other disciplines within the social sciences that are not thinking as clearly and as pointedly about these questions. So thank you for
Oh,
that.
thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And moving on, like, and I think it's building on to something you just mentioned, but like there's this fundamental contradiction, and it's possibly a contradiction of popular imagination and not necessarily of fact, but wherein you say that India's dairy and beef economy exist on like a quote unquote seamless continuum. At another point, is
Mm,
quote, there is no beef economy without dairy economy, unquote. Could you
mm.
explain how this contradiction works in public imagination and how it features in your work?
Okay. And this we get into the heart of why vegetarianism, for example, is seen as generally a benign, non-violent form of consumption. It's aligned with ahimsa. A lot of religious studies scholarship, nature-based religious studies scholarship, for example, conflates ahimsa and vegetarianism together because in a vegetarian diet, like for example, with dairy or with eggs, for example, we need the animal to be alive. We need the female farmed animal body to be alive, right? Because the continuous has to be from a living body, it has to be continuous. And eventually, when the body is no longer productive, that body is sent to the slaughterhouse. So if you look at any other leading dairy producing country, let's take Australia, let's take the United States, let's take Europe, let's take any dairy producing space whatsoever, whether it is a leading one or not, it doesn't actually matter. The cold economics of dairy production basically mean that, and it proceeds in this way: you breed animals for slaughter, you breed animals for dairying, you impregnate them, you breed them. The males automatically get sent towards slaughter, as infant calves for veal, older males for beef. So the males get constantly moved on straight away to the slaughterhouse. The females are impregnated, put through repeated pregnancies, separated from their calves in order for us to be able to take their milk, and eventually the dairy production continuum. There's a prolonged period of lactation, pregnancies, etc. That takes anything between 3 to 6 years, and at the end of that, the dairy production continuum, the cold economics, it's just an economic reality, is that unproductive resources must be disposed of. There is no type of production, animal or otherwise, where you're going to maintain unproductive resources, put resources into maintaining unproductive resources. You're not going to do that. So unproductive resources have to be disposed of. And in any dairy producing country, the continuum eventually proceeds to the slaughterhouse. That is accepted. That is not a problem. In India, this part of the production continuum is disrupted because here we say animals don't go to the slaughterhouse. Animals are instead just going to be put to pasture. They're going to be sent to gaushalas. So we have a cow protecting narrative where somehow uniquely in India, we are somehow able to um, disrupt the dairy production continuum without sending the animals to the slaughterhouse. So male or female, we don't have official licensed authorized cow slaughterhouses except in West Bengal or in Kerala. there's a few states, but in the main, the idea of a authorized licensed slaughterhouse, cow slaughterhouse, is one of bafflement, right? So we don't have one. So in India, we apparently don't do that. We send the animals to gaushalas. Now, and I explained this in one of my in my gaushala chapter, how even gaushalas cannot actually cope with this influx of animals that are discarded by the dairy industry, and how gaushalas are actually enrolled into the dairy production model, where they also have to backdoor exit of animals. So animals come in, and oftentimes there's been numerous documented court cases of gaushala selling animals for slaughter as well. So what happens in India is that, look, India is not spared from dairy economics. Okay, there's no way that India is going to be uniquely spared from that. So what happens in India is that no less than an industrial scale of cow slaughter simply goes underground. Now, it's not about one or two cows being slaughtered underground. It's about an industrial scale of it. It's a countrywide scale of it, right? And oftentimes these animals are trafficked into Kerala or West Bengal, but there are unauthorized illegal slaughterhouses in every state, in every city, in every region, in every village in India. It's profoundly prolific and geographical in scale. So because no one is actually spared the realities of production. So what happens is, just in India, the cow slaughter goes underground, and we have a situation where, again, as I mentioned, this labor is performed by Muslims, by Dalits, who are not just in a position of performing difficult labor, risky labor. It's actually, deep. It's actually labor that places them directly at risk, because in India, this becomes a criminal activity, right? So they're placed at risk. In India, cows are bred specifically for the dairy industry, right? If you look at any other major beef producing country, take Australia, take Brazil, for example, we have cows that are specifically bred for beef. So you have the Angus breed cows, you have the Wagyu breed cows, you have all of these specific breeds of cows that are bred for muscle mass. They are bred for specifically beef consumption. There's a whole range of physical heritability characteristics that are required in a cow that's bred for beef. In India, we don't even have beef breed of cows. We actually entirely breed cows for the dairy industry, right? So in India, Indian beef can be actually compared to chicken meat, for example, that comes from the flesh of egg-laying chickens rather than the big white broiler chickens, right? Because those broiler chickens are specifically intended for meat. And the egg-laying chickens are not, their flesh is not good enough for meat. So in India, we don't actually have a beef-producing breed of cows at all. So in India, we actually breed them just for dairy. Now, that is a primary reason. Dairy is the primary industry for which cows are bred in India. We have other offshoots. We have we have leather, which is legal. Again, cow leather is not legal. When I was doing my research on the leather tanning industry in India, which didn't make it to the book, we import cow leather, however, from Brazil, from Argentina, but we are officially not really supposed to be produced using cow leather in India because we don't slaughter cows. So that's the narrative. Though, of course, what happens behind scenes is otherwise. So bone char, right, that is used for whitening sugar. So, that is commonly used in the Indian sugar industry. So there's a whole profound pharmaceuticals, for example, that use animal-based products, cow-based products. So there's a whole range of sectors that do use cow-based industries, but uniquely we only criminalize beef because there is an agenda there, because beef is racialized. The other products are not racialized, right? Whereas we actually conveniently don't racialize dairying, even though dairying is actually linked with a Hindu identity, whereas beef is actually not linked with a Muslim identity. Dairying is actually used in ritual Hinduism. Dairying is actually core to Hindu practices, right? So it exists in a seamless continuum, because it is not so seamless in other dairy producing countries, because we have different cows for beef, different cows for for dairy. In India, it is actually seamless because the cows that are used for beef in India are the ones that are used for dairying. They were bred for dairying, right? So Indian beef is actually priced very low as compared to beef from Argentina or Australia or the United States, because these are obviously sourced from cows intended for beef. So the beef price per unit is much higher. And yet India is a competitive beef producer. How is that? It is basically because we slaughter 2 to 3 times the number of cows that these other countries slaughter. So we make our beef profits through the sheer mass of cows that are slaughtered. And this is what actually supports and scaffolds the dairy industry. We could not have a dairy industry if we were actually looking after these animals. We could not do it, right? So the production, the scale of slaughter is important. And this is not possible unless it happens in the informal economy. And the nature of the informal economy is that the state has to look away. The state has to look away. So that's generally how it has proceeded so far. And in 2014, we suddenly had an interruption of this looking away because not looking away was important to carve the idea of a Hindu state.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, and I think coming back to the mention of the racialization of beef, I think that points me to the next question I had, which again is like one of the interesting tensions and contradictions that you bring about in your work, which is about beef festivals. And you mentioned in your work that you attended beef festivals wherein Dalit students frame beef consumption as resistance to, I quote, untouchability, land rights, dignity of labor, food and cultural identities, unquote, all of which are linked to the broader Hindu nationalist politics of cow protection that you just mentioned. So in that sense, how do you think we can reconcile, if at all, animal activism which is geared towards rectifying the violence of bovine vulnerabilities, along with this politics of beef as caste as resistance?
That's a very, very important question. And what we need to consider here is that it's very common. For example, I have come across so many progressive, so-called progressive, and there would be progressive. These would be progressive Hindus, upper caste Hindus, in virtually most realms of life. And so a lot of progressive upper caste Hindus would come and tell me, for example, that, oh, well, I never used to even care for beef or consume beef, but I've started to consume beef to show solidarity to Dalits. There is every reason we should absolutely be showing solidarity to a group that has been brutalized in the name of cow protection, and especially a group that has been brutalized by an upper caste politics. So this show of solidarity, that movement in India that took place around 2014 as well, not in my name, right? The not in my name movement, to that a lot of upper caste Hindus or Hindus more broadly were using to basically say none of this violence is in my name. I am not in agreement with any of the ways in which cow vigilantes are targeting Dalits, targeting Muslims. And so this was actually really, solidarity is important. What becomes problematic is the use of, is a consumption of beef in showing solidarity. Now, from a Dalit perspective, beef has been rendered a mode of resistance. Okay, because beef has been weaponized, you got to use the same weapon to resist. That is actually quite logical. That is not an issue. That is not confusing in any way. Let me put it that way. But when an upper caste person or a so-called upper caste person uses beef to show solidarity, what we are doing is actually reaffirming the symbolic value of beef. Okay, beef has been conceptualized as a symbol of as a symbol that is associated with the Dalit groups. It has been associated with Muslim groups. I cannot tell you how many Dalits and Muslims have told me beef per se means nothing to us. It actually means beef has no particular significance than chicken or mutton or any other type of meat. It has been made significant. Right? It has been made significant because it has been criminalized and because it has had these sorts of stigmas and violent politics associated with beef. But in using beef to show solidarity, we are actually potentially reaffirming the symbolic value of beef. And we also need to understand that Muslims and Dalits are not being targeted, because because they are consuming beef. They are being targeted because they are Muslims and Dalits. Okay, Will Kimlicka has this fantastic paper in the context of Canada about how the right wing actually had no interest in animals. They didn't care about animals until they realized, hey, this is a pathway for us to harass minorities, harass Muslims in particular. So in the case of Canada, for example, the whole debate around halal slaughter versus stunt slaughter came up, right? About how halal slaughter is really cruel and stunt slaughter is a humane way to do it. Whereas if you actually look at the literature on slaughtering, stunt slaughter means really nothing. It means absolutely nothing. But there's a particular mode that is racialized. Halal is racialized in a particular way. Stunt slaughter is racialized in a particular way. One is inhumane, one is humane, right? But as Will Kimlicka talks about, he says the Canadian right, for example, the right-wing groups in Canada, they didn't care about animals. They weren't even interested in animals. They were using women's bodies all this while to sort of marginalize and show Muslim groups as backward or as um, misogynistic or whatever, and now they have just cottoned on to animals, and that is exactly what the right in India is doing as well. There is no central focus of care for animals, because if animals were really at the center of these sorts of debates, then we wouldn't be then the discussion would be entirely different. It would be focused on the dairy industry in the case of India. So there is a problem here in showing solidarity by affirming animal bodies in particular ways, in the ways that the right wing has actually conceptualized of them. In the same way that if we were to show solidarity based on the ways in which women's bodies were conceptualized by the Hindu right in particular ways. Okay, so what does that mean for women? Because women in being conceptualized also as cultural guardians of the state, as mothering bodies. Charu Gupta has this fantastic work on how women in being regarded as mothers have actually been forced into into lives of constraint, immense constraint, right? And into backward lives even, where the patriarchy doesn't allow women to sort of step out of these preconceived molds. So, but if we were to affirm and show solidarity in ways that affirm women's status in these ways, that would be problematic. So I think this is where we need to be really careful. And this is where I think we also have the opportunity to build alliances. Now, alliances don't always work. Okay, intersectionality doesn't always work, especially when it comes to human-animal intersectionality, because what generally happens is that the human interests always supersede. Okay, so the animal rights movement does actually need to have its own momentum. But there are absolutely important convergences which we must sort of converge with. And I actually think that the animal body is a way of showing solidarity, but not in a way that affirms the politics of the Hindu right. So in consuming beef as a show of solidarity, we are actually reaffirming and strengthening the politics of the Hindu right. A more radical act would be possibly to deny dairying, to politicize dairying, to show the problems with dairying, to reject dairy, for example, rather than consume beef, reject dairy. Let's see, what sort of radical politics that generates and what sort of discussion that brings into the fold. So I think solidarity is really important, of course, but the mechanism with which we advance solidarity must not sell out any type of vulnerable group, whether it is a human body, whether it's a non-human animal body, right? So that I think is what is tricky and can actually lead to really meaningful solidarities.
Thank you. I think again, like it's particularly fascinating, especially to think about, and like it's someone again like as in I've almost like my adult education and like adulthood has spanned the period of 2014, which is when I started university. So these questions of solidarity, alliances, power dynamics have animated student politics that I've been involved in. And like this is another dynamic again, like you've such an unexplored dynamic, such an overlooked dynamic that is so important because of so much of our reactions are born of ideas of guilt and ideas of privilege that we overlook some of the other hierarchies that we may be reinforcing. And like, as in harking back to something you said earlier about how we're forgetting anthropocentrism as an ideology that's still motivating so much of our reaction. So thank you so much for the answer.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Now, moving on to, like, for me, one of the most fascinating chapters of the book was chapter 6, titled Trafficking, given my own research interests. I think your work is one of the first texts that has really offered detailed insights into the vigilante organizational setup as it exists in the contemporary period. One of the more interesting observations you had there was something what you call the butcher vigilante police informer networks. Could you explain what these networks are and how do they facilitate the work of cow protection vigilantes?
Um, so when I was looking into slaughter, so I started with looking at slaughter and then I went back to the dairy industry and then I came back to slaughter. One of the interesting things about this segment of the production continuum is transportation, because we can't openly transport cows to the slaughterhouse from dairy farms. In India, we are not, because the narrative that we don't do it. That's not, that's illegal in most states. Like if you look at states like Gujarat, it's actually, the penalty is actually life imprisonment, right, for cow slaughter. So the mechanics of transporting cows to the slaughterhouse achieves a particular type of political resonance in India. Just this transportation, because transportation is normative. When I travel around Australia, when I travel around, even Melbourne, like, there are trucks of whether it's pigs or cows or chickens, they will just sort of normatively flow through the city or flow through the highways or flow through regional highways, whatever. But in India, this is actually a very political segment. So what happens here is that cows are transported underground to various types of underground slaughterhouses as well. Now, since 2014, when cow vigilantism started to come into fore, what happens? Let me explain cow vigilantism. What happens is that these cow vigilantes that are, basically blue collar, low level workers, so to speak, for various types of political parties, what they will do is quite literally stand, oftentimes in highways, in highway checkpoints, because that's where the trucks have to pass through, right? So they will quite literally place themselves in front of the trucks, halt the trucks, force the drivers and their workers to get down, get into big fights, seize the animals, and the animals usually get sent to a gaushala or to an animal sanctuary, and then there can be major altercations between the workers and the vigilantes, right? So between the truckers and the vigilantes, so they can be, this can involve whole gradations of violence, oftentimes resulting in violent beatings, lynchings, death. All of this has been in the news in India. So what now truckers need to do, for example, is to try and avoid these sorts of routes. So they'll oftentimes take back routes. Sometimes one truck will be stopped, and then they will immediately have WhatsApp groups, and they will basically WhatsApp all their other truckers, basically saying, "Don't come this way because the vigilantes are here." So they have to, they'll take other routes. Okay. Vigilantes also need to know when to stop trucks, because once the trucks stop taking the usual routes, because they know that these people will be present there, they need to start taking back routes. They need to start taking alternative routes. And now they don't know where to go. Okay. Oftentimes these vigilantes work in the cities, and then they go into, I don't know, let's say regional Tamil Nadu. They don't know the geography. They don't know where to wait, and they miss all of these trucks completely. So what happens is that there is a need for vigilantes to know where to stop the trucks. And alternatively, there is a need for butchers to know how to go safely. To do this from both ends, you need informers. Now, where do informers come from? Informers usually come from within of the other side. Okay, so butchers will basically need an informer, need an insider from the vigilante network to basically say, "We here, just avoid," right? And so they are usually paid informers. And the vigilantes, in turn, also have informers who are oftentimes typically within the butchering community itself. So so some of the butchers will inform on their own communities and basically say, X is going this way, or blah is going this way, or this many trucks are going this way, or this many animals have just been loaded into this truck. If you go and wait at such and such point, you'll be able to stop them. Okay, so informers are really important. You can't not have informers in, first of all, safely going to the slaughterhouses, or alternatively, in trying to stop the trucks and basically enact the performance of protecting the Hindu state, because the cow body is the Hindu state, right? So this network is really important, and the police is informed. The police will play both sides. The police will inform on the vigilantes, help the vigilantes, the police will equally help the butchers. So this is really, really important. So what this does is it's not so straightforwardly black or white, or in terms of binaries that there's vigilantes on the one side and the butchers on the other side, because oftentimes they actually have to work together. They may not want to work together. They may not even necessarily like each other, but it's a question of survival for the butchers. Oftentimes it is a question of protection, because I'm a butcher, I'm going to inform on my neighbors, and that'll hopefully at least keep my family safe. Okay? Survival, life in any form wants to live, no matter what means, whether it is human or animal. We want to live. So if the stakes for me are that I betray 3 of my neighbors, but then my family is guaranteed safety, I'll do it, right? So that's oftentimes the stakes for the butchers. Sometimes the payoff also is that, look, let me do my butchering quietly, don't stop me, but in return I'll give you a whole pile of information. So there is that as well. There's survival of the business, there's survival of the livelihood, there is ways to do it. I need to do it, I need to do it, just let me do it. Let's be quiet about this, but here is who you can have. Okay. And the vigilantes as well will oftentimes make money from the butchers, because this is, the thing about the vigilantes is oftentimes they are doing it also for survival and livelihood. They are unemployed. We have a huge range of, the surplus labor, so to speak, right? Marxist surplus labor. This surplus labor needs to be kept unemployed in some way, precisely to be able to do this kind of work, this kind of political work. This is really dirty labor. Not just dirty in terms of ethics, but even for the vigilantes, the risks involved in physically getting into altercations. Butchers often come armed with knives and other weapons, because first of all for their own safety, but that's also tools of their trade, quite literally. So it's quite literally risky labor for the vigilantes as well, which I think is also underappreciated, because that is the reality. If you look at the low-level workers of any type of terrorist activity, if you look at their motivations, it's not necessarily the carving of the Hindu state. That's not what they are more interested in, just finding a way to live as well, right? And that is also something that is being exploited. So they will oftentimes take bribes from the butchers and say, you give me a bribe and I will inform you of what routes are safe, where we are is not safe. So they work in this way, right? So this sort of butcher, police, vigilante network operates in really complex ways at the transport segment of the dairy production economy, because it is not straightforward. And this is where nation is made, this is where nation is unmade, but this is also where livelihoods are made. And you can also see the very sort of complex interlinks between livelihoods and nationalism itself. Okay, it's not, I will perform nationalistic labor, but that is often for my livelihood rather than a sentiment, if you see the difference.
Thank you. I'm really struck by like the complexity of the network that you outlined, particularly because in my own work on like interfaith couples and love jihad cases in UP, we've looked at the role of informers who sit in courts where either they would force interfaith couples to take out public notices of their marriage, and the vigilante networks where they would scan these newspapers, or they would ask couples to come later for marriage registration. And in that time, these court informers would then quickly through their WhatsApp group tell the vigilantes, oh, there's this couple coming for marriage registration, you come then. The vigilantes would then tell the police that this is going to happen and we're going to beat them up, or we're going to coerce them. And the police is, again, like you said, playing both sides, if at all, or like just giving impunity to the vigilantes. I'm just struck by the parallels between these cases.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's also, and even the police, if you look at the police that is operating in the highway, okay, the police constable who's quite literally patrolling the highway, and the police constable that is, circling the butcher area, for example. Now, these are not powerful police officers. These are not from the Indian police service, okay? These individuals have virtually no power themselves. The police constable in India is actually classified as a semi-skilled laborer, which is just mind-boggling if you think about it. They have really low salaries. They also need to sort of, get into receiving and taking bribes. So there is stakes here. There is fully livelihood stakes here for all of these 3 groups. right? So the police there's stakes in being part of the butcher network equally as being part of the RSS network or any other sort of political party network. I have so often they will tell me about it is so interesting if I wanted to talk to a butcher and he would tell me all this and I would just say something out loud. I was like, oh my God, I really need to talk to these people. And he's like, oh yeah, I'll put you onto them because they talk to each other, right? The butchers and the vigilantes talk to each other. So oftentimes my source of a vigilante interview would come from a butcher or the other way around because they talk to each other
Yeah, that's
and
fascinating.
and they work with each other.
Yeah. Anyhow, now moving on, like the conclusion to your book is titled Envisioning Post-Dairy Futures. Could you explain what post-dairy futures can look like and if there's a potential for such futures in a country like India?
So with post-dairying, in some ways I sort of go back to India's dairying roots itself, which was formulated in the 1950s under Korean's leadership. And because India was not really a dairy consuming culture per se. Like there's very few states or cultures in India where, as a culture, as a mode of consumption, separate from ritual use, India was not really a dairy consuming country per se, though it was. As with any type of product, you formulate it, you sell it, you make it attractive, and suddenly it becomes a thing that we need to buy. And we can say that about virtually any type of product. And Korean's memoir talks at length about how strategically dairying was sort of peddled as this product as a way of basically generating farmers' livelihoods. His focus was always to generate farmers' livelihoods. And my idea of coming to a post-dairy futures here is to obviously I think one of the first links is to focus on, if we are to take um, animal rights seriously, but I'm not talking about why should we do it? Okay, because we can go on with business as usual and not doing it, right? We can continue, but I think this is where we actually get confronted with our own sort of doublethink and with our own sort of hypocrisy, really, right? Because suffering in any form is one of the main motivations when we advocate for any type of human justice. Okay, whether it comes to ability, whether it comes to diverse gender identities, whether it comes to minorities, majorities, whatever it is, suffering is the primary propellant. And Jeremy Bentham, one of the animal philosophers, he said this in his foundational text. It's actually a footnote in his text, but he basically says the thing with animals, and I'm paraphrasing quite poorly here. The question is not whether can they speak. Question is not can they reason, but the question is can they suffer. Okay, if we are willing to disregard suffering in and of itself just because it is located in a non-human body, then I think it really brings into question about what will we get away with if we could, even in the case of humans, right? Because in the case of humans, we have particular ways of vocalizing and resisting that we recognize, right? Especially in the progressive space, it becomes really impossible to sort of work on any type of oppression without being called out. And we absolutely should be. So, but it brings into question about what we can get away with, because if we are so blatantly getting away with violence, inflicting violence and perpetuating violence on the non-human animal body, then if we could get away with it, why wouldn't we in the human realm as well? So I think it really brings into question, because what human rights is about is fundamentally protecting vulnerable people, isn't it? It's about protecting vulnerable people. It's protecting them against us using unchecked power, our power over them. Okay, so why shouldn't we be checked in using our power over animal bodies as well? Because we are also animals. We should be able to forge that as some type of connective tissue in terms of having empathy. So I think that really brings that into question. It seems to me that we really need to be actually politicizing animal-based products, given that they arise out of so much suffering. There is the environmental case for veganism, for example, but I didn't want, and I do mention that, but only fleetingly, because I don't want to make an environmental case for social justice. I think social justice should make a case for itself, whether or not there's an environmental reason for it. We don't say, oh, we should be anti-racist because it's good for the environment. We should be anti-racist because we should be anti-racist. We should be non-sexist because we should be non-sexist. Whether or not it's good for the environment, that's not even a factor in when we come to these sorts of politics. So that was for me quite central in our constitution talks about having compassion for animals. Well, what does that actually really mean if it's a fundamental duty? But much more broadly, where does our human obligation lie? Because we think about our obligation to a whole spectrum of identity groups. We are aware of it. What about our obligation to animals? And specifically considering, is post-dairy futures relevant for India? I don't think it is unique. I don't think this question is necessarily unique to India. The question probably more is post-dairy futures something that humans will take up no matter where they are, right? Will we do it? Will we do it? Because virtually every country, every culture is invested in dairy consumption in some form as a cultural history. Katie Gillespie's book, The Cow with the Attack 1389, talks about how dairy, mac and cheese, milk, cookies, whatever, they're also entangled with the American childhood imagination. It's so entangled with the making of the American nation itself. Milk, for example, is something that the alt-right in America mobilizes as something that separates the Aryan races from the non-Aryan races. So I think all cultures in all countries basically have stakes in dairy consumption. So not necessarily uniquely relevant to India, but I think much more globally, but much more broadly to human species as such. And here is where there's so many different ways, and this is where the confusion sort of comes up about how can we sort of start mobilizing and institutionalizing non-dairy form modes of consumption. And I don't necessarily just think that it's a question of product replacement. Or let's say you take vegan cheese and replace dairy cheese with vegan cheese. I actually think we need to step back into our food production systems itself. Like even agricultural food production systems is so flawed globally. Right? Like there is so many problems with the way that we, the Green Revolution ushered in this sort of era of really problematic farming practices, genetically altered modes of farming practices. We really need to go back to indigenous modes of even agricultural farming, and I think there's a movement in India, which is kind of a bit of an elite movement that looks at, indigenous pulses, indigenous millets as more nutritional and, more in line with our culture. So there's a little bit of a movement, but I think it needs to sort of really be institutionalized much more specifically in terms of food security. And but even if we were to think of product replacement, there is so much scope. Like, for example, if you look at the cashew industry, and cashew is oftentimes used as a alternative, a vegan alternative, right? So you have cashew-based milk and cashew-based cheeses. If you look at the cashew industry in India, it is profusely scarred and marred with human rights abuses, child rights abuses. Okay, they use children to peel the cashew nuts. This is documented human rights abuse when they get burns from cashew peeling because the acid from the cashew peels really harms the unprotected workers, right? There is so much scope here to clean up these sorts of industries, to bring the focus. So our advocacy doesn't just end with saying go vegan. It doesn't just end with animal rights. It's sort of this constant recognition of the stakes across the board. Basically, I think what I'm personally guided by is sell out nobody. Like, let's not advocate any type of politics that's going to sell out anyone. So if you're going to advocate for, product replacement, let's look at the cashew and peanut industries, which are so problematic, and really look at giving farmers livelihoods and that are sustainable. But this is also going to potentially help dairy farmers if you really clean up the farming industry, because dairying in India, as I said, was not born out of any other reason but to provide sustainable livelihoods. You move this somewhere else. You move the idea of sustainable livelihood somewhere else. You actually can employ the very same strategies that Verghese Kurian did for the White Revolution, asking for subsidies, lobbying hard for subsidies, putting farmer first, thinking constantly, what does it mean to put the farmer first in this particular sector? What does it need? Okay, so he went across the board in trying to strengthen dairy farmers, starting from cutting import subsidies on foreign dairy, um, within India, providing massive subsidies, but also unconditionally taking milk from farmers. So, India actually has a milk glut at the moment. The reason why milk farming is still attractive is because the state is obliged to buy milk through the milk cooperatives, whether or not it needs milk. India has a milk glut. Virtually every country has a milk glut. So what we normally do is just basically keep dehydrating the milk and storing it as milk powder because there's just too much milk, right? So, but farmers will do it because it's a guaranteed source of income. So we can do this in other means and ways of farming, and we should be doing this, and we should actually be looking to strengthen farmers across these other sorts of farming sectors. There's a high rate of farmer suicides in India. So going post dairying is not just relevant for cows or for other animals used in dairying. In fact, India has just legalized camel milk. So I think there is a lot at stake for animal rights and there's a lot at stake for the state of the environment in India. But there's a lot at stake much beyond that. So we actually need to have a very expansive view of what the stakes are. It's not narrow. It's not a question of just, us giving up. It's a question of a much expanded potential and possibility for very radical flourishing futures across the board.
Thank you. That's such an important message. Anyway, I've taken up a lot of your time, but I wanted to end by asking you that throughout the book, you mentioned the challenging personal nature of studying and observing the remarkably normalized violence of the dairy industry and its blatant obfuscation in public imagination. How did you navigate these experiences personally, and what advice do you have for researchers and other graduate students working in similar circumstances?
I actually just wrote a paper. It's under consideration at the moment. After writing the cow book, one of the first questions that I often get asked is, how did you do it? Like, the methodological scale of it, the ethnographical scale of it, but also just the act of witnessing. It's my research in many ways, and I talk about this in this paper that I've just written. My ethnographic approach in many ways was very much at odds with traditional ethnography, which is rootedness in one space. You sort of stay in the one space, you sort of form deep roots in the one space, form bonds with the community, and do that. That was an option for me as well. I could have just situated myself in any part of India, for example. I could have done it in Delhi, I could have done it in Tamil Nadu, or I could have done it in Gujarat, anywhere. And the fundamental message of the book in terms of what dairying means for the animals would not have changed. But there were various other things that I had to think about. One was, these are actually spaces of violence. And in spaces of violence, we really need to formulate ethnography that is attuned to it, right? It's quite risky sometimes to talk to vigilantes in one space and try and form sustained relationships and then also become marked in some ways. It is actually easier to interview many similar types of people, but also across many similar sites. So one of the ways that I did this was to basically go to a number of dairy farms instead of just the one farm, go to a number of slaughterhouses instead of just the one, go and speak to a number of vigilantes across the country instead of just one community in a particular space. So I kept moving. I call this kind of the Rolling Stones multi-species ethnography, and I kept moving. The other motivation here, which would have really disrupted my research, is potentially forming bonds with the animals themselves, right? Because if I was to stay in a dairy farm and if I was to look at these specific individuals and form my own relations, because we do form relations with the animals. Radhika Govindarajan's book does this beautiful job of reflecting on how human-animal intimate relationships are formed and made, and the stakes in these relationships. And I thought, if I were to stay and form these relationships, my political orientation changes in some ways in trying to work for these animals, trying to liberate these animals. I could get these animals out, put them into sanctuaries. My life turns into sustained care and advocacy for these animals, which is absolutely one way of doing it. But what does that mean? But there would have been a particular loss in canvassing the scale of of dairy production, the scale of nationalism, the scale of the butcher vigilante networks, which are not just localized, but they're actually countrywide. They're countrywide networks, right? These. That's the thing about these networks. They're countrywide, and they are not just political networks. They're actually production networks as well, because they are an important part of the dairy production continuum. And you get to see things in a Rolling Stone sort of approach, which is difficult to see in the one space. Like, looking at animals, we were driving through the Guntur Vijayawada highway, for example, and there was literally a river of cows, river, like it's a mass seasonal migration of animals, but they were being basically walked on foot towards markets and towards slaughterhouses, and you can see them on open fields being tied, right? They're just openly visible, but you need to keep moving in order to see these sorts of witness these sorts of events. So my approach basically ethnographically was to move in sites of violence. I think there's a really strong case for doing that. But in moving through as rapidly as I did, I think it is important to go to multiple similar sites, because it is difficult to make a sustained case based on brief visits to one site if you're going to keep rolling one type of site. So I think the trick here, in order to sort of still maintain the sustained nature of ethnography, because ethnography is generally a sustained type of method, and you sort of spend sustained amounts of time. You're still spending sustained amounts of time, but across multiple similar sites. So I think that was one of my ways of doing it. And central to that was to try and not form too many attachments to animals, because that would have disrupted what I was trying to do in the context of field work. And there is a space for sustained contact with animals. And, when I came back to Melbourne, I really wanted to do something, beyond just donating to animal groups, or what was I doing for the animals? And we started to rescue chickens. So we have rescued chickens in our backyard who were, liberated from egg farms in various factories from Melbourne. And that kind of exposed me to another type of feminized protein, which is not milk, but, eggs. So I haven't written that much about it yet. I just got a paper out on chickens and the sort of feminist politics of eggs. But these are the ways in which I think I'm trying to show some accountability to the research and to the various sort of vulnerable bodies enmeshed in these research spaces. And it's never going to be a perfect mechanism of doing it. And there is always regret. There is always guilt. I think animal ethnographers, but ethnographers more generally of violence, always talk about the guilt, because one of the things that you're doing is you're constantly walking away. And it becomes very difficult to sustain that as a human being, because you have the freedom to move, you have the freedom to leave. And the sense that you're extracting becomes even more visceral, because I think ethnographers and anthropologists always have to reckon with this idea that research can become extractive, because you get to leave. But the idea that you get to leave is even more visceral when you're located in a site of violence, because you get to leave and you are safe, and that's a privilege of the ethnographer. So these kind of accountabilities are really are an ongoing sort of work in progress in constantly trying to think about this, reflect about this, and to frame most ethical responses as much as possible that you can in that moment.
Thank you for that response. I think that personally resonated a lot, and I think it's going to resonate a lot with other researchers and graduate students working in this field. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so relieved to know that. Thank you, Yash.
Yeah. Thank you for the conversation. It's nice speaking to you.
Thank you so much again for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks.